Welcome to the ESRC Festival of Social Science. Thank you very much for joining us. This is a little different for us, so we'd normally be out there seeing you in person. So it's a little unusual to be doing it online from our homes. I'm joining you today from a surprisingly sunny and bright Birmingham in England. We'd love to know where you're joining us from, so please do add your comments in the chat and let us know where you're coming from. And as you go through the session as well, please do add questions into the chat. We want your questions. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think about our panel of speakers. Yeah, we want to get your opinions, your thoughts, and we want to hear from you. So do keep putting things into the chat. My name is James Brown. I work at the Warwick Institute of Engagement. And it's a real pleasure today to welcome our speakers. One benefit of doing this all online is that we've got an incredible international panel. We're talking today about global collaboration, working together across the whole world. And what we've got today is an incredible international panel. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our chair for this session. It is Good News Oshobele, and he's going to take charge of today's session. He's going to introduce the rest of the panel, and he'll be in charge of sort of coordinating and making sure all our questions get answered as well. So yes, as I say, keep those questions coming in the chat. You can also join us on Twitter at Warwick Engages. I'll use the hashtag ESRC Festival. But without further ado, let me introduce Good News, and I will disappear and hand over to you. Good News.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, James, for the introduction. So like James said, today we're going to be talking about global challenges require global collaboration. And for this session, we have three speakers who will be speaking on how social science may help promote pro-environmental behavior. So the first speaker for tonight will be Dr. Elena Sautkina. She is a professor at the School of Psychology. Dr. Elena Sautkina is about joining us on air. Yeah, so you can see her. Thank you very much, Dr. Elena, for coming. She is an expert in environmental psychology, and I'm privileged to have been a student at the National Research University Higher School of Economics. The second speaker for this session is no other person than Dr. Jäkel, an associate professor at the National Research University Higher School of Economics. He is an expert in public administration and environmental policy. Dr. Jäkel, you're welcome. And then thirdly, Dr. Henning Wilts. I don't know if he has been able to join us successfully in the studio before now. So, but however, we expect him as soon as possible. So thank you very much for joining, and we expect you to ask your questions in the comments like James already said, and please don't just be audience, be participants, participate. So now I welcome Dr. Elena Sautkina to take over and share with us her thoughts about this topic. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Good News, for the introduction. So maybe we can start the presentation. I've prepared, although I'm talking from a sofa, so science from your sofa, that sounds just about right, but I have some a few serious slides as well to show and to talk through. So because here we talk a little bit about pro-environmental behavior, I thought I will do a little bit of an introduction to this topic. And definitely pro-environmental behavior is required from everyone to solve the environmental crisis. So that links very well to global changes. I'll talk about the role of psychology because that's the area of social sciences that I work in, and I'll talk about psychology's role in mitigating the environmental crisis. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So what is environmental psychology? I'll just explain in a nutshell. You can go to the next. Yeah, so environmental psychology is, as you understand, it's an area of psychological science, and it's a very interdisciplinary one because, you know, by definition, because it studies the interplay between people and their environments. And by the environments, we mean such things as, for instance, natural environment. That's something that gave birth to us. In second instance, it's cities, urban environments, and that's something that we have given birth to as human species. And pro-environmental action, it's something that environmental psychology studies a lot nowadays, and I will explain this probably next. So it's interdisciplinary because environmental psychology works across areas. Actually, it started as architectural psychology in the 60s, 70s. That's where psychologists worked together with architects to resolve some of the urban problems. But then later on, actually, they moved on to study people's relation with the environments because as a society and, as a scientific community, we have understood what we have actually done to our planet. And that's where the next slide would be useful. So if we could go to the next one. Yeah. So here we see on top, among the pictures at least, we see on top left a cover of the book that was released by the Club of Rome. I don't know how many of you have heard actually about Club of Rome. It was, again, a collective of scientists, of politicians, some from the UN, some from other places, who have brought together let's say, a perspective on growth on the planet. And that was in the 1968 that it has been formed. And what was its resolution is that we have already, by that time, by 1968, we have already reached a limit that our planet can sustain. So that was clear from basically late 60s that we have reached the limit of growth on our planet, and that relates to economic growth, that relates to population growth, and of course that has such implications as growth in emissions. Now on the next picture, you see actually a graph that is slightly covered, but that's okay. So you can see that roughly from from around post-war, thank you so much. Yeah, so from the post-war times, all that red sector is growing, and it has been increasingly growing from 1960s. So that's carbon emissions, and that's the rise in global temperatures. You can see that before that time, the carbon emissions were relatively on the negative, and at the moment they are growing really fast. I couldn't probably bring too many slides here, but to tell you the truth, around the same time, everything is coinciding in terms of our industry development, in terms of the impact on nature that we have, and many, many other things. You can probably consult a book that I will mention towards the end if anyone is interested, or place it in comments. Mathieu Ricard is a scientist who writes about altruism, and in his book Altruism, he actually gives many of these examples. So psychology's role from 1990s, that's where environmental psychology started to look into pro-environmental behaviors, was to understand the psychological and social causes of the environmental crisis. So what does lead people to overconsume, to pursue constantly the activities that are negative for the environment, understand the mechanisms of people's behavior towards the environment, and identify ways how to change people's behavior. I have to say that we cannot blame population for everything, definitely, but human behavior is also something that we can address to diminish. If the demand for harmful products is decreasing, probably, and the demand for beneficial products for the environment is increasing, hopefully we can achieve also something more sustainable for our planet. If we start saving energy, it's the same. If everyone, looks into insulating houses instead of spending more on energy, that is helpful. If people invest more into green energies, again, carbon neutral energies, that is more beneficial. So there are many examples like this. If we sort our waste, that is also very helpful, and so on and so forth. If we use less car, or if we buy cleaner cars, if we care for the sort of transport that we use, if we stop taking transatlantic flights or long haul flights every month, that will be very helpful for the planet. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So what is pro-environmental behavior? Yeah, next one. So it's basically people's actions that is defined as people's actions that harm the environment as little as possible, or even benefit the environment. That was probably clear from what I said just before. And then we go to the next one. And here are some examples that I've also covered. So basically, it's everyday actions that helping to save our planet. It's on the left-hand side, you see more things such as reuse, reduce, recycle kind of examples. Yeah, bring your own cup, sort your waste, bring your own bags, not plastic bags, definitely not. And on the right-hand side, you see the types of behavior that help to reduce carbon emissions and reduce our impact on climate. And here, number one, so you actually read it from right to left. So the biggest impact, and that's not surprising, yeah, given what was just said about the Club of Rome and the limits to growth, having one fewer child is number one type of action that we should take to save our planet. Obviously, it's not because we don't really take this, and that's where psychology is probably helpful to understand how people's reasoning works. We don't necessarily as citizens, as just humans, realize that bringing one more child to the world means that it's another consumer. Basically, that's what it means. Unfortunately, we need to take this seriously, and it's very hard, something very hard to consider, because it's our lives, it's it's our children, it's our future also. So there's a lot to discuss about this. But then leave car free is probably possible, especially for urban population. That is becoming increasingly possible with better transportation. Avoid long-haul flights is possible, and COVID is showing us right now that we can stay at not necessarily staying at our homes. Unfortunately, we also have to during the lockdowns, but also we haven't had so many travels over this year as we usually do. I'm sure a lot of us had to restrict ourselves to our own country or even our own area, and we haven't been that unhappy. At least I have to say by my own example that I have discovered a lot of things nearby, and that hasn't impacted my level of happiness, or there is still a lot to do, and probably just stay a little bit chilling and relaxing somewhere close by in the nature is good, and that helps to reduce some emissions for sure. So we can, there are many other examples you can see here, appliances that save energy and so on, but we all know about this. Also, eating a plant-based diet also helps. It depends what kind of plant-based diet. If it's brought from somewhere on the opposite side of the world, it's probably not very helpful, but eating local plant-based diet is good for the environment. So we move to the next. Yeah, so what else does environmental psychology actually help with? It studies social factors such as norms. What sort of examples exist in society that help us to act pro-environmentally, what sort of values. So what is important to us? Is nature important to us? Is saving climate important to us? It's our identity, if we identify ourselves as environmentals or not, or people who care for the environment. Also, our education is an important, thank you. Our education is also an important factor. Personality factors play a role. For instance, openness to change, conscientiousness have been related to more pro-environmental behavior. Cognitive factors. We know that we tend to postpone risks and, all kind of unpleasant events. So they are cognitive biases, they are called in psychology. So climate change has been denied. One of the factors why climate change reality is denied is because of the psychological distance. And then there are sort of contextual factors. So if policy is adequate, environmental policy, if the supply of environmental friendly or products or, appliances or anything, that we can really, these are just small things that I've mentioned, but actually supply needs to be dealt in a sort of systematic way to help us to really be pro-environmental. Solar panels should be available to people, for example, in some countries where they are very difficult to purchase, like Russia, for example. I don't think it's very easy. And then, of course, contextual factors can include, significant personal constraints and so on. So we can move to the next one. And I'm nearly done. I'll be very quick. So what else does environmental psychology do to help? Next one, please. Environmental psychology analyzes the effectiveness of interventions to change pro-environmental behavior regarding, for instance, education and information provision. So how do you advertise recycling to people, for example? How do you explain it? That can be important in some areas, in some countries where recycling is just being introduced. It's also analyzing whether rewards and charges are effective, whether they are really changing people's behavior. For instance, I was part of a large study in the United Kingdom on the English plastic bag charge when it was just introduced in 2015. And then the use of persuasive technologies such as smart meters is currently studied a lot in environmental psychology. So how do we present the feedback about our energy consumption, their energy consumption to the users? And then we also help to design behavior change interventions and policies. And the next one, and that's the last slide, that is sort of, then it's just the closing one. Yeah, so what also environmental psychology does is why its role is important is because I think it helps to build bridges where understanding gaps are large. So when we talk about intersectoral and interdisciplinary work, we talk about the fact that people don't really understand each other always. So people from different sectors, and sometimes people even working in different sciences, they don't necessarily understand each other's realities. So that's probably where psychology could be helpful. It's probably not using its potential enough at the moment in this sense. But actually what we do is that we work with other sciences already. We collaborate a lot. There are associations, scientific associations, such as International Association for People Environment Studies, for example, that brings together people from various disciplines to discuss these kind of issues that I'm talking about. And then it's also actively collaborating with other sectors, scientists collaborating with governments, educational institutions, businesses, NGOs, and so on. And I'm done. If you could just put the last slide. And I would like to thank everyone for your attention. I'm sorry I overrun by a few minutes, and you can contact me at this address if you want to ask any questions after the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elena, for that interesting session. Quickly, we would like to invite Dr. Tim to take over. We don't have much time. So Dr. Tim Jäkel, please share with us your thoughts about the topic of this session. Thank you very much for coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your interest in our event. Could we share my slides with the audience? Okay, there we go. Thank you. So in the next 10 minutes, I will outline how political and administrative sciences may help to promote pro-environmental behavior. The next slide, please. And I will start from the notion that human behavior causes global damages to public health, the environment, and the economy. And I will pick 2 out of those 8 global environmental problems, excessive waste generation and air pollution, to develop my argument. Waste generation, for example, has become one of the world's 8 major environmental problems. And the Pacific garbage patch is just among the most visible consequences of excessive waste generation. But the causes of these problems start with us. An average individual in OECD Europe generates almost 500 kilograms municipal waste per year. People in Denmark even generated almost 800 kilograms per capita, which outperforms even the United States. An average German resident still generates more than 600 kilograms per year. So what the table essentially shows that is that municipal waste management is a global challenge. Next slide, please. So we wish to transform behavior that harms the environment into pro-environmental behavior. And you will probably agree with me that this is easier said than done. First, we need to be clear about the antecedents of human behavior. First of all, there is a difference between the intention to do something and actual behavior. I'm sure many people would love to generate less packaging waste, for example, but go to any supermarket in Moscow. There you can choose from a dozen milk suppliers, but you won't find a single one to bottle their milk. The intention to do something is driven by a variety of motivations. And attitudes towards the environment, as Professor Sautkina explained, shape those motivations. Social norms, the perceived expectations from relevant others, such as parents and friends, and legal rules will impact attitudes, expected utility, and thus human behavior. So my argument is that social science can help to design policy programs and interventions by uncovering barriers to pro-environmental behavior and the underlying behavioral mechanisms. Those obstacles include government failure. It took the European Union to set thresholds for air pollutants to limit the negative health effects. Nonetheless, until recently, about 60 German cities regularly exceeded air quality limits for major pollutants. It further took an NGO and a talented and brave lawyer to sue driving bans before the highest German court. So this is a classical example for government failure. Lack of transparency is a traditional obstacle. Take air quality monitoring in Russia and Germany as an example. Cities in both countries closely monitor air quality. In Germany, the latest data from every measuring station are publicly available on the internet. In St. Petersburg, data are available only upon request. And this fuels mistrust in environmental data and government. And if you don't trust your government, you're less likely to comply with its rules, aren't you? The same goes for mistrust in the court system. Low trust in Russia's court system helps to explain the low number of climate change litigation, as another example. And another barrier is the blame game, or the politics of environmental reforms. And it's the role of political science to uncover the politics or the blame cycle. A carbon tax, for example, or a new metro line to ease public transportation, they set incentives to pro-environmental behavior. But in the short run, all those measures are associated with noise, dust, inconveniences, and other negative side effects. The positive effects appear only in the long run, and various costs appear short term. And this causes resistance from people that are affected by those short-term costs. Next slide, please. Given those insights, a sustainable waste management strategy or policy combines 5 crucial factors. First, investment in infrastructure in order to create sufficient capacities for separate waste collection and recycling. For example, Russia In Russia, few households separate their waste because it's inconvenient and impractical. The second factor looks into volume-based pricing schemes for households, or they're also called pay-as-you-throw schemes. They provide private households with a financial incentive to reduce their total amount of waste and better separate their remaining leftovers. The third factor encompasses extended producers' responsibility and advanced recycling fees for producers in order to set incentives for green design and waste minimization. The fourth factor tackles green public procurement in order to stimulate demand for products made from secondary resources. And finally, environment education is seeking to raise environmental awareness. Environmental education is the most effective and most sustainable way to minimize waste generation because educational measures have long-term effects. They are built on intrinsic motivation, that is behavior from people which receive satisfaction from that action. Next slide, please. Putting those principles into practice faces several challenges. It takes a little time sometimes. Educational measures have long-term effects. It takes a generation to change social norms and attitudes towards the environment. Another major challenge is goal complexity. Goal complexity means, or is associated with the question, do we really know which action yields a particular response? For example, does a volume-based fee for garbage collection lead to higher recycling rates? So does X lead to Y, where X is the volume-based fee for garbage collection and Y is the recycling rate? Or does the fee set incentives to dispose waste illegally, as seen on the right hand, without any impact on recycling behavior? These are some of the obstacles we need to address. So those were some examples from political science and administrative science research that I'm into. Next slide, please. So thank you for your attention, and you might be interested in having a look at my blog or my corporate website. Thank you very much. Looking forward for your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jäkel, for that timely presentation. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Henning. I didn't introduce him initially because he was having some connection problems with joining us in the studio. So right now we have Dr. Henning Wilts. He is the Director of Circular Economy, an expert in the economics of waste management, and he's from the Wuppertal Institute of Climate, Environment and Energy in Germany. Dr. Henning, you're welcome. Please share with us your thoughts about today's topic.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and of course, thanks a lot for the opportunity to give a short input to this discussion and this specific topic. I would like to add a few points on what Professor Jäkel already described, and I chose the heading of transition from waste management towards the circular economy, the challenge of this transition. And I would like to make 3 specific points, and I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. The first thing is that I'd like to talk about what is the difference between waste management and a circular economy. Secondly, what are the key benefits, the potential benefits of becoming circular? And then finally, how do we get towards a circular economy? How do we achieve objectives like zero waste? To the first point, looking at waste management and taking the example of my home country, Germany, we've seen that Germany considers itself as the world champion in recycling. And on paper, we actually have really impressive recovery rates. Looking at plastics, for example, just 2 weeks ago, the German ministry announced the new recycling quota. And we have a recovery rate for plastic packaging weight of 99%. And it looks like we already solved the problem. And we have to say that waste in Germany doesn't pose any direct threats to the human health or to the environment. But on the other hand, we have to see that the actual key challenge of our time, the increasing use of natural resources, is completely not really addressed by this issue of waste management. Now, looking at the global scale, we see that last year, for the very first time, the humankind consumed more than 100 billion tons of natural resources. And here we see that waste management doesn't really contribute a lot to break this link between economic development and this increase of resource use. And you can also see that if you look into the statistics, because now we have this recovery rate of 99%, but if you look at the share of recycled material in our economy, also in Germany, it's below 14%. If you look at plastics, it's below 10%. So the question is, second point, how do we get to a circular economy, and what would be the benefits? The circular economy, for example, defined by the European Commission, is not about getting rid of waste, like in waste management, but to preserve the value of products and raw materials contained in them at the end of their use phase as optimal as possible. And that means we have to think about the design of products in order to be able to recycle them. We have to think about new business models like leasing and sharing that aim to generate less waste. And if we look into the scientific discourse, and if we look into the policy papers, it looks really promising. The European Commission just, or in March, published its Circular Economy Action Plan, expecting more than 700,000 new jobs from becoming a circular economy. Studies, for example, by McKinsey estimated the potential cost savings at 600 billion euro per year from a European circular economy. And also from an environmental point of view, recent estimations calculated that a circular economy would mean 50% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, so a real contribution to climate change. So if we look at these environmental and economic benefits, the third point and my last point is, if that's so convincing on paper, why aren't we already a circular economy? Why is it so challenging to bring together all these stakeholders and to cast circular alternatives compared to our current linear system? And here we have to see that if we want to bring these stakeholders to the table, if we want them to discuss what could be the design of product that the recyclers can actually manage with, we have to see that this kind of cooperation is costly, it's time consuming, and of course it's complex and thus risky for companies. Also looking at the economic incentives, if we talk about waste management and recycling technologies, we know exactly the return of investments, for example, for a new waste incineration plant or for a recycling facility. If we talk about waste prevention, then we also have to think about how do the consumers react on that. Do they actually want less waste? Would they buy packaging products, for example, with recycled materials, or do they see any threats for their personal health? Do they doubt the quality of that material? So this is much more complex and thus risky. And nevertheless, there are extremely promising examples. For example, in Germany, we just supported the city of Kiel in becoming the very first German zero-waste city. For over 2 years, the citizens, together with local companies and the government, discussed what could be ways to become a zero-waste society. And in the end, everyone agreed on a roadmap that would lead to a reduction of 70% of residual waste by 2050, 50% already in 2035. And I think one point that I would like to discuss today is what kind of knowledge would we actually need to support such transitions? Is it the purely economic research? Is it biological research? My personal feeling is we have to integrate it. We need more interdisciplinary and especially also transdisciplinary research involving the citizens, involving the companies. But here we are at the very beginning of the discourse. And if we can come up with new innovative ideas, how to turn that into promising research, I would be more than happy. Thanks a lot. Really looking forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henning Wilts, for another very interesting presentation. And at this point, we would like to take the questions and answers session, where we get to the panel discussion in proper. Yes, this is the part I like the most. All right, so we don't have much time right now, but I will quickly request that we have some questions that were asked already, which we have already picked from. Could you please have them on screen if possible? Because we selected some questions already, I want to quickly start trashing them. Let me see if I can find the first one from my end here. Okay, so the first question here is from Hannah M. And the question is, if I want to go zero waste, what's the easiest way to change my behavior in this way? So this question goes to the panel, actually, to everyone. So if you want to be the first to answer, just please start answering. And did you get a question? If we want to go zero waste, what's the easiest way to change my behavior in this way? I think this is more targeted at Dr. Elena.
Yeah, I mean, I can try and give a quick answer. If you mean that you yourself want to go zero waste, just as Tim has pointed out about motivation is important. So you probably already have motivation to go zero waste. I would suggest getting all sorts of information about zero waste products. There is a lot of information out there, a lot of, internet is very helpful nowadays. So you can find this information. Then you can search what sort of products are available in your area, in your country. And then probably sometimes it's not the cheapest products out there. You can find a way to probably save as well as still buy them. So you can always, I'm not an economist, but you can calculate, where you can save something that you don't really need. And then you can allow yourself, you can afford probably more expensive products on that end. So that would be my answer.
Thank you very much. Does any other speaker have a response to this question, please? Okay. Well, yeah, Dr. Henning.
If I may add to that, I fully agree. If you look at it from a waste stream perspective, the easiest way to become zero waste are probably looking at food waste as one of the most easiest to address waste streams. We buy so much food, we throw away so much on a global level. 1/3 of the food that we produce is wasted, and that's an incredible waste of natural resources. So food. The other thing is packaging. We should use much more reusable packaging. And then finally, and that is something that not too many people think about, the biggest waste stream that we have is construction and demolition waste. And in Germany, we have a trend of people living in ever bigger flats and ever bigger houses, and that leads to more construction and demolition waste. And if we want to become zero waste, and if we mean that serious, we have to think about our patterns, how we live, what kind of accommodation we actually want and need. And this has to be an important part of every discussion about zero waste.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Henning. Please, can we have the next question on the screen? All right, okay, so the next question is to Dr. Jäkel. Exactly. So how to incentivize people to recycle more and produce less waste?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Raphael. So my answer is strongly depends on the country. So recycling behavior is a function of a lot of things, but depends on the awareness of people. And I would like to answer for the Russian case, which I know quite good. In Russia undergoes a waste reform. So they launched a comprehensive waste strategy already a decade ago, and now we really started a waste reform. But the plane doesn't really take off. Why? A major factor is that people don't share the notion that it makes sense to separate waste, they distrust the government and waste management schemes. This has a lot to do with corruption and a lack of environmental awareness. So there's a ban for landfilling, for example, but there's a lack of capacity for recycling. So people in Moscow, the capital, for example, now divide between, let's say, wet waste and plastic waste and packaging waste. But there's a lack of capacity to handle those resources. And that's a huge problem. So the plan is to burn everything, essentially. And I would refer to my slide with the five factors. So we need to address not just one factor. So it doesn't make sense to just introduce higher fees to make people pay for their waste. So they will this will fuel mistrust. So we are paying more for the same quality, for the same low quality, right? And as I said, the most sustainable solution, but the most, difficult one, is to start with environmental education in schools and even in kindergartens, to make people aware of the fact that it makes sense economically and environmentally to separate waste. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tim, for that response. Please, can we have the next question on the screen? This is Dr. Elena. How can environmental psychology work alongside with archaeology and anthropology, and what's the difference?
Well, I would skip archaeology because I don't think it's really, really talking about archaeology in this case, but anthropology probably, in a sense, would be helpful, and we do have collaborations with social anthropologists in particular. Well, there is a lot of lessons, I guess, to take from social anthropology, historical anthropology about human race. They are more theoretical than practical, probably, but definitely there are ways to understand, how we came about to create such an environmental crisis. To understand where we took responsibility, where we shifted from being zero waste society, literally, in the past, because our waste was mostly organic, or then we could burn it without creating a lot of air pollution, such as wood, and we used natural materials in the past. So how we shifted, at which point in the history we shifted. I think, though, we know these lessons pretty well now. We probably need to popularize them to understand, to make society probably understand that the way we're living now is just not quite normal. And if we are living in this way, we should assume the responsibility. We should really take care of the impact that we are, the weight that we are putting on our planet by our activities, and be extremely responsible about our actions, about our waste, about our energy consumption, and so on. We are smart, we're the smartest on the planet, so we should also be able to look for the solutions and find them. And actually the problem probably now, especially with climate change, that time is really coming to the end. We don't really have much time to do these kind of things. So it has to be urgent, and that's where sciences, should come together with others to find solutions to solve this crisis.
Thank you very much. Can we have the next question on the screen, please? So how can we aim to change the behavior or attitudes of the consumers of the future, such as children and young people, such as make it more appealing or promote pure altruism and others? I think this is to the panel. So anyone who wants to answer can just pick up the question and answer it, please. Right, Dr. Tim Jäkel, thank you.
So again, it should be a mix of incentives. If there's the capacity to handle separated waste, for example, and if there is an extended producer's responsibility, meaning that if I go to the supermarket, that I have a choice to choose between, let's say, bottled milk and milk in this PET plastics, right? Then you can have financial incentives. Now in Germany, it's up to you. So if you have a lot of packaging waste, you will pay more at the end of the month or at the end of the year. So it's up to you to a certain extent. But it requires capacity and some awareness for that recycling makes sense. So it's a combination, as in everyday life. So people respond to a variety of incentives, right? People try to avoid punishment or paying more. So that's an incentive. Of course, intrinsic motivation is very important. In the long run, behavior should be based on some extent of intrinsic motivation. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. We have another question. Can we have it on the screen, please? Okay, this is from Michaela, and she says, in which points does circular economy turn into waste management? I think this is to Dr. Henning. And how is it decided to consider at this point?
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's an excellent question. I think also the European Commission would be highly interested to know the final answer on that. From my personal point of view, sustainable waste management or any waste management has to be really a crucial and important part of a circular economy. But the difference is that in the 60s, 70s, when we developed our waste management infrastructures, and we were just thinking about how to get rid of the waste. How can we dispose it in order to reduce the impacts on the environment, on human health? And the question of circular economy, or the concept of circular economy, is more about how do we minimize the risks of resource overconsumption? How do we ensure proper supply security with raw materials? So other economic, social aspects raise an importance and also have to be integrated into a circular economy. So for me, it's not a question, do we have waste management or circular economy? The question is, how do we integrate them? And here we see that in most countries of the world, the designers of products or those who put products on the market never talk to any recyclers, so they have no idea what happens to their product at the end of the life of the use phase. And that is the key challenge we have to address.
Maybe just one additional comment. So a huge problem is the low resource efficiency. So that's another point. So we need to increase resource efficiency. That's also very important for circular economy.
Thank you very much. Can we have the next question on the screen, please? Are there needs for clearer definitions of terms in circular economy, like zero waste and all that? Dr. Henning, please.
Yeah, that's also a brilliant question. There was a very nice paper by a colleague of ours, Mr. Kirchhoff, who published a paper, I think last year, presenting more than 114 definitions for the term circular economy, just from the scientific literature of the last 5 years. So there's an abundance of different interpretations, definitions for the term. And I personally always refuse to come up with the 115th. So I think it's very important that we all have a clear idea, what are we talking about if we say circular economy. But for me, the question is more how to implement it and how to go beyond the theoretical discourse on what could be an optimal definition. But we also have to see that this uncertainty about the term is exploited and abused by a lot of, for example, industrial stakeholders who try to keep the governments from taking actions on that. And they always say, no, we have to be clear about what we're aiming for, and let's talk about definitions. And that is a specific risk that I see if we don't come from theory to action.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. A quick question to the panel, and I'd really like us to share our views about it. The question is, how can psychology, public policy, and economics disciplines be redesigned to more productively address climate change? Because we are looking at how social science can bring about this change. So how can we design these courses, the curriculum, so that it can address anti-environmental behavior, if there is something like that in quotes?
Probably we should work together and bridge our disciplines at some points, collaborate and find ways, what we can insert in terms of, political science, psychology, economy into our courses, into our lectures. I don't, we are supposed to teach our disciplines, but if some of the disciplines that we teach are about, like I teach psychology of sustainability or environmental psychology, I can definitely incorporate something into my courses, that my colleagues would like to supply, or invite someone to a seminar or to a lecture and give something from their point of view. That would be something that I think would benefit everyone, at least from my point of view.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tim. What do you have to say about the aspect of public administration? What can be included in the discipline to make it address anti-environmental behavior?
Talking about political science and even more about administrative sciences, we should add more evidence or let's say content from environmental scientists into our subjects. So there's a lack of expertise about the mechanism from a natural science perspective. So this is something we should improve. And collaboration is always good. And maybe environmental politics, or make this part of a curriculum, something like this. So put the word environment in the curriculum somehow. So this will raise attention to the relevance.
Thank you very much. Dr. Henning, please, what about the aspect of consumption and production as it relates to economics? How can we structure it to address anti-environmental behavior?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, in our institute, we have a very interdisciplinary research team. 1/3 is in background in economics, 1/3 in environmental engineering, and 1/3 in social sciences. And working together, we try to address these complex, overarching challenges of resource efficiency, circular economy. And that's why I would fully agree that cooperation and collaboration is always helpful. But for us, the key challenge is how do we develop our own quality standards for research? Where's the difference between political activism and working as an NGO, and what is the part of research in our daily work? And I think the challenge will be to develop methods, tools, quality standards also for this interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research when working together with companies, with stakeholders. How do we ensure that this is still excellent research that can be checked by everyone? How do we make sure that there are protocols, how to develop such projects, strategies, policies, and how can we discuss it nevertheless on a scientific level? And I think there is still a lot of room for improvement.
Thank you very much for your responses. I am very grateful, and I'm very thankful to our audience who have been active participants who have asked their questions, and we hope that you got the answers to your questions and you're satisfied. Thank you very much for joining this session. I am grateful to everyone, and thank you to James for an excellent time with you in the studio. Now we would have to leave and hand over to James. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Sorry to have to cut off that discussion. It was going fantastically, but we do have another session which is starting on the hour, so we need to be very prompt. I've put the YouTube link for the next session in the chat, so if you want to go to that, do follow that link. You don't need to have registered in advance; just go straight ahead to that and have a look. If you still have questions which haven't been answered, do go on Twitter. You can find us at Warwick Engages, or you can follow the festival at ESRC Festival. And there are still plenty of events going on this week. You can find all the Warwick ones at this website address, but you can also then link through to the full festival site. And I think there's over 100 different events going on throughout the week. So do get involved and keep these discussions and these conversations going. Thank you again to the panel and to Good News for an excellent job chairing and getting all your questions. And thank you. And hopefully we'll see you again soon in another session shortly. Have a good evening.